What if Necrons reclaimed the Golden Throne? The Vox grill crackles with the death of a star, and the Astronomicon flickers like a candle drowning in its own wax. Somewhere beneath the Palace of Terra, a throne wrought from golden nightmares groans under the weight of 10,000 years, and the thing that sits upon it can no longer be called alive. But what happens when silence finally comes? What happens when the tomb kings of a dead universe walk through the halls where humanity prayed for salvation? This is not a story of hope. This is the chronicle of the moment the galaxy learned that some thrones were never meant for mortal flesh. The Golden Throne stands in the heart of Terra, buried so deep beneath the Imperial Palace that the weight of humanity's hope could crush mountains. It is not beautiful. Beauty died here millennia ago, suffocated under layers of cable and tubing that writhe like the intestines of some vast mechanical god. Promethium burns in braziers that have not been extinguished since the Horus heresy, casting shadows that dance across walls inscribed with prayers in 10,000 languages. The air tastes of ozone and incense, a combination that coats the tongue with the flavor of desperation. Tech priests move through the chamber like ghosts, their augmetic limbs clicking softly against the stone floor, their flesh long ago surrendered to the machine. They chant in binaric cant, numbers flowing from Vox grills in a prayer that has no meaning beyond its repetition. They do not look at the throne itself. They cannot. To stare too long at the master of mankind is to invite madness, to see the truth that the Imperium has spent 10 millennia denying. He sits there still, the emperor of mankind, the anathema, the carrion lord. His form is withered, skeletal, flesh pulled tight across bones that should have crumbled to dust ages ago. Golden armor, once radiant enough to blind, is now tarnished and cracked, fused to flesh that no longer heals. Tubes pierce his body at 1,000 points, feeding nutrients that cannot sustain, draining poisons that cannot kill. His face is a skull wrapped in parchment skin, and his eyes, when they open, burn with a light that is no longer entirely human. Psychers scream when they sense his presence. They feel the weight of a consciousness so vast that it has begun to bleed into the Imoterium itself. A psychic pressure that holds back the howling legions of the warp through will alone. Every day, 1,000 psychers are fed to the throne, their souls consumed to keep the dying god alive for one more sunrise. Their screams echo through corridors that smell of burned meat and sanctified oils. The Adeptus Custodes stand guard with halberds held in hands that have not trembled in 10,000 years, but even they can feel the change. The throne is failing. The mechanisms that the Emperor himself designed are breaking down, one by one, and the Mechanicus no longer understands how to repair them. The knowledge was lost in the dark age of technology, buried under layers of superstition and ritual that replaced understanding with faith. The Imperium teeters on a knife's edge. 1,000,000 worlds pray to the God Emperor, unaware that the object of their worship can barely hold his own body together. The Astronomicon, that great psychic lighthouse that guides humanity through the warp, flickers with increasing frequency. Ships are lost in the Imoterium, swallowed by daemons or spat out centuries after they departed. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, has torn the galaxy in half, and on the far side, worlds burn in heretical fire while their cries for aid go unanswered. Chaos presses against reality like a fist against glass, searching for cracks, testing the barriers that keep the material universe separate from the howling madness of the warp. And in the depths of the palace, the Golden Throne groans. It is the sound of a machine that was never meant to run for this long, a warning that no one wants to hear because to acknowledge it is to acknowledge the unthinkable. Terra itself strains under the burden. The entire planet is a tomb, layer upon layer of hab-blocks and manufactorums built atop the ruins of older hab-blocks and manufactorums, stretching back to before humanity reached for the stars. Hive spires pierce the clouds, their peaks lost in the upper atmosphere where the air is thin and cold. Below, in the underhive, mutants and gangers fight over scraps, while Arbeits enforcers maintain a brutal semblance of order. The population is uncountable, trillions of souls packed into spaces that were designed for millions. They labor in the manufactorums, assembling bolter rounds and lasgun power packs with hands scarred by industrial accidents. They pray in cathedrals that could house entire armies, their voices joining in hymns that rise toward the throne itself. They do not know how close they are to oblivion. They cannot conceive of a universe without the Emperor, because he has always been there, watching over humanity since before their great-great-grandparents were born. But the Custodians know, the High Lords of Terra know. And in their hearts, beneath layers of denial and procedure, they are terrified. This makes the notion of a Necron victory at Terra seem impossible. The solar system is the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. Battle stations orbit every planet, their lance batteries capable of reducing cruisers to vapor. The Sol system defense fleet numbers in the tens of thousands. Warships of every class, from nimble frigates to massive battleships that have not moved from their defensive positions in centuries. The phalanx itself, the mobile fortress monastery of the Imperial Fists, maintains a vigil in the outer system, and should any enemy breach these defenses, they would face the wrath of the Adeptus Custodes, gene-wrought warriors whose skill in battle is legendary even among the Space Marines. 10,000 Custodians guard the palace, and each one is worth 100 Astartes in combat. To imagine the Necrons overcoming all of this, to picture their cold metal feet treading upon the sacred soil of Terra, is to imagine the impossible made manifest. Yet in the grim darkness of the far future, the impossible has a habit of occurring when least expected. The Necrons are not like other threats. They do not hunger for flesh like the Tyranids. They do not rage against existence like the forces of chaos. They do not wage war for resources or territory like the Orcs or the Tau. The Necrons have transcended such primitive motivations. They are machines wearing the memory of flesh, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, and they pursue agendas that span millions of years. Once, they were alive. Once, they were the Necron tier, a species of flesh and blood that looked upon their short, cancer-ridden lives and cursed the gods that created them. They made a bargain with the Khurtan, the star gods, creatures of living energy that fed upon solar radiation. The Khurtan offered immortality, and the Necron tier accepted without understanding the price. Their souls were stripped away, their consciousness transferred into living metal bodies that felt nothing, tasted nothing, remembered sensation only as a phantom echo. They became the Necrons, and they waged a war against the old ones that nearly destroyed the galaxy. When the war in heaven ended, the Necrons turned on their Khatan masters, shattering the star gods into fragments and entombing them in tesseract labyrinths. Then, weary and purposeless, they entered the Great Sleep, retreating into tomb worlds scattered across the galaxy to wait for the younger races to die out. Now they awaken. Tomb worlds activate across the galaxy, their systems slowly coming online after 60 million years of dormancy. Some Necrons rise as they were, their minds intact and their personalities preserved. These are the Necron nobility, the pharaons and overlords who command entire dynasties. Others are not so fortunate. The Great Sleep was not kind to all, and many Necrons awaken with their minds fractured, reduced to little more than automata that follow the last orders they received before entering stasis. The Necron warriors shamble forward with empty eye sockets glowing green, their Gauss flayers stripping matter away atom by atom. They feel no pain, no fear, no hesitation. Destroy one, and it will phase out, teleporting back to a tomb complex where it will be repaired and redeployed. They are relentless in a way that even the Tyranids cannot match, because the Tyranids at least have the biological need to feed. The Necrons want nothing except to reclaim a galaxy that was theirs before humanity's ancestors learned to make fire. Their technology is terrifying in its sophistication. Gauss weaponry reduces flesh and bone to component atoms, leaving nothing but a greenish mist where a human once stood. Quantum shielding renders their vehicles nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, flickering in and out of phase to avoid impacts. Dolmen gates allow them to travel through the Webway, bypassing the warp entirely and moving across the galaxy in ways that would make an Eldar Farseer weep with envy. And then there are the pylons, reality anchors that suppress psychic phenomena in a radius around them. Where a pylon stands, the warp grows distant and cold. Daemons cannot manifest. Psykers lose their connection to the Imperium and become little more than frightened mortals. The Necrons understand the fundamental structure of reality in ways that the Mechanicus can only dream of, and they wield that understanding with a precision that makes their every action seem effortless. But why would the Necrons seek the Golden Throne? They have no use for human technology, primitive and crude as it is compared to their own. They have no interest in ruling over the Imperium, for they view humanity as little more than vermin infesting a galaxy that rightfully belongs to the Necron tier. Yet the Golden Throne is not merely a life support system, it is a gateway. Deep beneath the palace, the Webway project remains unfinished, a shattered dream of the Emperor himself. During the Horus heresy, Magnus the Red, in his desperation to warn his father of Horus's betrayal, shattered the psychic wards protecting the Webway portal on Terra. Daemons poured through, and the Emperor was forced to abandon his other plans to hold back the tide. He has sat upon the Golden Throne ever since, his psychic might the only thing preventing a catastrophic warp breach beneath the Imperial Palace. If the Necrons were to claim the throne, they would not do so to save the Emperor or to continue his work. They would do so to control the Webway portal, to seal it permanently, or to repurpose it for their own use. A dolmen gate beneath the most sacred site in the Imperium, allowing Necron legions to deploy anywhere in the galaxy without warning. The strategic value alone would be incalculable. The scenario unfolds in stages, each more nightmarish than the last. It begins not with a direct assault on Terra, but with a carefully orchestrated campaign spanning decades. The Necrons do not rush. Time means nothing to creatures who have slept for 60 million years. A pharaoh of the Sotek dynasty, an overlord known as Imotekh the Stormlord, sets his gaze upon the throne world. He has conquered hundreds of systems, his forces moving like a rising tide across the eastern fringe. But Terra is different. Terra requires subtlety, planning, and a willingness to sacrifice millions of lesser Necron units as distractions. Imotekh begins by activating sleeper tombs within the Sol system itself, ancient Necron installations that have lain dormant since before humanity's first empire. These tombs are small, little more than defensive nodes containing a few dozen warriors and a handful of immortals, but their awakening sends shockwaves through the Mechanicus. Tech priests dispatched to investigate disappear, their last transmissions filled with static and the hum of Gauss weaponry. The High Lords declare a state of high alert, but their attention is divided. The Great Rift consumes their focus, chaos incursions on 1,000 worlds demanding immediate response. The Necron threat is noted, catalogued, and assigned a priority just below the Daemon invasions tearing through the Imperium Nihilus. That is the first mistake. The Necrons do not invade like Chaos or the Tyranids. They do not announce their presence with warp storms or psychic screams. They simply appear, silent and inevitable, their forces materializing from dolmen gates in places where no gate should exist. Skitarii patrols on Mars find entire cohorts slaughtered, their bodies reduced to ash, their weapons fused into slag by heat that should not be possible. Forge complexes on the Red Planet go dark, their output ceasing as Necron Canoptech constructs, infiltrate and dismantle critical systems. The Fabricator General mobilizes his forces, but the Necrons are already gone, phased out before the counterattack arrives. It is a pattern that repeats across the system. Hit-and-run attacks, surgical strikes designed to weaken and demoralize. The Necrons are testing defenses, probing for weaknesses, and they have all the time in the galaxy to learn what they need to know. Terra's outer defenses begin to fail. Not catastrophically, not all at once, but in small increments that compound into a disaster. A battle station near Jupiter loses power, its reactors inexplicably shutting down despite no visible damage. Investigation teams find Canoptech scarabs inside the reactor cores, their tiny forms having chewed through shielding and critical components with mechanical precision. The station is evacuated and scuttled, but the damage is done. The cordon is weakening. A cruiser detachment patrolling the asteroid belt encounters a Necron Cairn-class tomb ship, a vessel so ancient that it predates human spaceflight. The cruisers open fire, their lance batteries and macro cannons blazing, but the tomb ship's quantum shielding absorbs the impacts without a flicker. Then it returns fire. Gauss particle whips reach across the void, stripping away armor, plating, and vaporizing entire decks. The cruisers break apart, their wreckage tumbling into the asteroids, and the tomb ship continues on its course as if nothing had happened. Distress signals reach Terra, but by the time reinforcements arrive, the tomb ship has vanished, leaving only debris and the echo of static-filled Vox transmissions. The Custodians sense the threat. They are the Emperor's personal guard, gene-crafted warriors whose purpose has not changed in 10,000 years. They feel the wrongness in the air, a subtle shift in the psychic currents that flow through the palace. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes convenes a war council, his golden armor reflecting the light of braziers that have burned since the heresy. He speaks in measured tones, his voice carrying the weight of millennia, and he tells the assembled commanders that the Necrons are not simply raiding the system. They are preparing for something larger, a coordinated assault that will dwarf anything the Imperium has faced in recent memory. The High Lords listen, but they are politicians as much as military leaders, and politicians require proof before committing resources. The Captain General provides it, picked captures from servitor surveillance drones, grainy and distorted, showing vast formations of Necron units gathering in the outer system. Monoliths, towering constructs of living metal, phase into existence near the Oort cloud. Doomsday arcs, crackling with energy, assemble in formations that suggest a battle plan. The numbers are staggering. Millions of Necron warriors, tens of thousands of vehicles, and at the center of it all, a world engine, a planetoid converted into a weapon of extinction-level power. The defense of Terra mobilizes. Warships that have not moved in centuries fire their engines, shaking off the dust of decades as they position themselves between the Necrons and the throne world. The Imperial fists descend from the phalanx, their Primarchs gene sons ready to defend the cradle of humanity as they have always done. Astra Militarum regiments are recalled from the eastern fringe, their troop transports burning through warp space at speeds that risk catastrophic failure. The Grey Knights, the Daemon Hunters, deploy from Titan, their presence a testament to the severity of the threat. Even the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, march to war, their voices raised in hymns of faith and fury. Terra has not seen such a muster since the siege of the Emperor's palace during the Horus Heresy, and the comparisons are not lost on those old enough to remember the stories. This is not a raid, this is an invasion, and the Necrons are coming. The battle begins at the edge of the system, near the orbit of Neptune. The Sol Defense Fleet meets the Necron vanguard in a clash of fire and void. Macro cannon shells the size of hab blocks slam into Necron Scythe-class harvest ships, punching through holes and detonating inside. But the Necrons do not die easily. Living metal flows like water, sealing breaches and repairing damage even as the ships continue to advance. Gauss arcs reach out, invisible lines of disintegration that strip Imperial vessels down to their skeletal superstructures. Cruisers explode, their reactors breaching and sending shockwaves through the void. The fleet fights with everything it has, pouring fire into the Necron line. But for every tomb ship destroyed, 2 more phase into existence from dolmen gates that should not be able to open this close to Terra. The battle is brutal, merciless, and ultimately futile. The Necrons are not trying to win here. They are simply clearing a path, and they will pay any price to do so. The world engine advances. It is a moon, stripped of atmosphere and converted into a weapon. Its surface bristles with Gauss cannons and particle beams, and its core houses a power source that burns with the intensity of a captured star. The Imperial Navy throws everything it has at the world engine, but nothing slows it down. Torpedo salvos detonate against its shields, creating brief flares of light before the shields reassert themselves. Bomber wings from carrier groups dive into its defensive fire, their pilots screaming prayers as Gauss beams vaporize them mid-flight. The world engine's main weapon charges, a massive Gauss obliterator that draws power directly from its stellar core. When it fires, a beam of green light lances across the void, striking a battle station in high orbit over Uranus. The station does not explode. It simply ceases to exist, disintegrated atom by atom, leaving nothing but a faint shimmer where millions of tons of adamantium and plasteel once stood. The message is clear. The Necrons can unmake anything humanity builds, and they will do so without hesitation or remorse. Jupiter falls. not the planet itself, but the defensive platforms and shipyards that orbit it. Necron immortals teleport onto the platforms, their Gauss blasters cutting through Skitarii and Imperial Navy armsmen with mechanical efficiency. The defenders fight back, lasgun volleys and bolter fire filling the corridors. But the Necrons are relentless. Destroy one, and it phases out, only to reappear moments later behind the firing line. The slaughter is methodical, room by room, deck by deck, until the platforms are silent and the Necrons stand alone amidst the bodies. The shipyards burn, their construction docks collapsing as Necron Canoptech wraiths tear through the support structures. Warships under construction, nearly complete, tumble into Jupiter's gravity well and are crushed by the immense pressure of the gas giant's atmosphere. The loss is catastrophic. Terra has just lost a significant portion of its shipbuilding capacity, and there is no time to mourn. Mars becomes a battlefield. The red planet, sacred forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, finds itself under direct assault. Necron forces phase onto the surface, emerging from dolmen gates hidden beneath the Martian sands. The Skitarii legions respond with overwhelming firepower, their transuranic arquebuses and plasma calivers tearing into the advancing Necron warriors. But the Necrons have brought Canoptech constructs, spider-like machines that skitter across the dunes with disturbing speed. Canoptech spiders repair damaged Necron units in real time, their fabricator claws knitting living metal back together faster than the Skitarii can inflict damage. The titans of Legio Tempestus stride into battle, god machines whose plasma annihilators and volcano cannons can level cities. They trade fire with Necron obelisks, monolithic structures that float above the battlefield and rain Gauss fire down upon anything that moves. When an obelisk falls, it does not crash. It simply phases out, leaving the Titan crews victorious, but uneasy. They are fighting an enemy that does not bleed, does not tire, and does not fear death, because death has no meaning for them. The fighting on Mars reaches the gates of the great forges themselves. Necron warriors advance through the streets of Olympus Mons, their formations perfect despite the devastation around them. Skitarii defenders set up choke points, using the narrow streets to funnel the Necrons into kill zones where heavy weapons can do the most damage. It works. For a time, las cannons melt through Necron chest plates, and plasma fire reduces warriors to molten slag, but the Necrons adapt. Lichguard, elite warriors armed with war scythes and dispersion shields, teleport into the midst of the defenders and carve through them with brutal efficiency. The Skitarii fall back, their binaric cant prayers turning desperate as they realize they cannot hold. The forges are breached, and Necron forces pour inside, their interest not in destruction but in seizure. They want Mars intact. They want its knowledge, its STCs, its accumulated lore. And the Mechanicus, realizing this, makes a horrifying decision. Rather than let the Necrons claim the forges, they activate scrap code protocols buried deep within Mars's databanks. The scrap code is a virus, a digital plague that corrupts everything it touches. It spreads through the forge networks, shutting down systems and causing catastrophic failures. The Necrons are unaffected, their systems too alien to be touched by human malware. But the forges themselves begin to die. Reactors overload, manufactorums grind to a halt, and the Fabricator General weeps, knowing that he has just killed the planet he was sworn to protect. Terra itself is now under siege. The Necron fleet has breached the inner system, and the final defensive line forms in orbit around the throne world. Every warship that can still fly is here, their crews exhausted but determined. The Phalanx hangs in geostationary orbit, its weapons, batteries locked onto the advancing tomb ships. The Imperial fists prepare to board the enemy vessels, their chainswords and bolters ready for close combat. The Grey Knights stand ready as well, their psychic wards glowing with inner light, though they sense something strange about the Necrons. There is no taint of chaos here, no whisper of the warp. The Necrons are anathema to the daemonic, their very presence pushing back the Imperium. In another context, this might be seen as a blessing. Here, it is simply another layer of nightmare. The orbital battle is apocalyptic. Lance strikes carve through Necron hulls, and torpedo spreads detonate in chains that light up the void like newborn stars. But the Necrons are inside the defensive envelope now, and they are not fighting to destroy the fleet, they are fighting to reach the surface. Assault craft, angular and silent, detach from the tomb ships and dive toward Terra, their quantum shielding absorbing fire that should have vaporized them. Point defense turrets track the craft, auto-cannons and lascannons filling the sky with traces and beams, but there are too many targets. Some craft are destroyed, their wreckage burning up in the atmosphere, but dozens more make it through. They land in the wastelands surrounding the Imperial Palace, their ramps lowering to disgorge legions of Necron warriors. The soil of Terra, sacred and ancient, is trodden by metal feet that have no right to walk here. And in the depths of the palace, the golden throne groans, as if sensing the approach of something fundamentally wrong. The Adeptus Custodes mobilize. 10,000 golden-armored warriors, the finest humanity has ever produced, march out from the Eternity Gate to meet the invaders. They are armed with guardian spears and sentinel blades, weapons that crackle with disruptive energy fields capable of cutting through living metal. Behind them come the Sisters of Silence, blank-souled warriors whose very presence dampens psychic phenomena. Though the Necrons are not psychers, the Sisters' null aura disrupts the quantum entanglement that allows Necron technology to function, forcing the machines to rely on more conventional physics. It is a small advantage, but the Custodians will take any edge they can get. The two forces meet on the plains before the palace, and the battle is like nothing the galaxy has seen in millennia. A Custodian is worth 100 Astartes, but the Necrons are not Astartes. They are patient, methodical, and utterly without fear. Gauss flares fire in disciplined volleys, their beams stripping away auramite armor layer by layer. Custodians fall, their bodies reduced to atomic mist, but they take dozens of Necrons with them, their spears punching through chest plates and shattering resurrection protocols. The fighting is close, brutal, and exhausting in a way that Custodians have rarely experienced. They are being pushed back, slowly, inexorably. The Necrons are advancing toward the palace gates. Inside the palace, the reaction is one of controlled panic. The High Lords convene in the chamber of the Senatorium Imperialis, their voices raised in argument and recrimination. Some demand an immediate counterattack, a muster of every Space Marine chapter still loyal to Terra. Others call for evacuation, a retreat to the outer worlds, and a regrouping before the Necrons can consolidate their hold. The Captain General of the Custodes silences them all with a single word: there is no retreat. Terra is the heart of the Imperium, and if it falls, every human world will follow. They will fight here, on this ground, and they will hold until every last defender is gone. The High Lords nod, their arguments forgotten in the face of duty. Preparations are made. The palace is sealed, its gates locked, and its defenses activated. Gun emplacements hidden in the walls swivel to face the approaching Necron legions, and deep below, in the Sanctum Imperialis, the Golden Throne continues its work, the Emperor's will holding back the tide of the warp even as his children prepare to die in his defense. The Necrons breach the outer walls. It is not done with brute force, but with precision. Cryptechs, Necron technomancers, who understand the fundamental laws of reality, analyze the wall's structure and identify the weak points. They deploy quantum destabilizers, devices that unravel molecular bonds at the subatomic level. The walls, built from adamantium and reinforced with faith and prayer, begin to crack. Fissures spread across their surface, glowing with a sickly green light, and then entire sections collapse inward, crashing to the ground in clouds of dust and debris. Necron warriors march through the gaps, their eye sockets glowing with cold fire, and behind them come the Lich Guard, and behind them the Triarch Praetorians, and behind them the Overlords themselves, riding in command barges that hover above the battlefield like metal gods. The defenders fall back, firing as they go, but the Necrons are unstoppable. They have come for the throne, and nothing will turn them aside. The fighting reaches the inner sanctums. Corridors that have not seen battle since the Horus Heresy are now drenched in blood and ash. Custodians make their stand at the Eternity Gate itself, the massive portal that leads to the Sanctum Imperialis. They stand shoulder to shoulder, their spears forming a wall of blades, and they do not move. The Necrons advance, step by inexorable step, and the two sides collide with a violence that shakes the foundations of the palace. Custodian spears pierce Necron chestplates, and Necron warscythes cleave through Auramite armor. Both sides are dying, but the Necrons have numbers, and the Custodians do not. One by one, the Golden Warriors fall, their bodies piling up before the gate, and still they do not retreat. They die where they stand, and their last thoughts are of duty, of the Emperor, of a promise made 10,000 years ago to guard him until the end of time. The gate falls, not because the Custodians failed, but because there are none left to hold it. The Necrons stride over the bodies of the dead, their metal feet echoing in the sudden silence, and they enter the Sanctum Imperialis. The chamber beyond is vast, lit by the glow of the Golden Throne itself. The throne dominates the space, a towering construct of machinery and faith, and upon it sits the Emperor. The Necron overlord, Imotekh the Stormlord, pauses at the threshold. He is ancient, even by Necron standards, and he has seen the rise and fall of 100 species. But this is something different. The being on the throne is not human, not anymore. It is something vast and terrible, a psychic presence that presses against the walls of reality like a hurricane trying to break through a window. Imotekh feels nothing, his emotions long since burned away in the biotransference. But if he could, he might feel something like respect. The Necrons approach the throne. Tech priests, still alive and cowering in the corners, watch in horror as the machines inspect the mechanisms that have kept the Emperor alive for 10 millennia. Cryptechs scan the throne with instruments that glow with an eerie light, analyzing its structure, its power source, its connection to the Webway portal below. They communicate in a language of clicks and hums, a sound that grates on the human ear and makes the surviving tech priests weep. One cryptech reaches out with a metal hand and touches the throne. There is a flash of light, a psychic pulse that ripples through the chamber, and the cryptech is thrown back, its form scorched and smoking. But the damage is done. The throne has been disturbed, and its systems begin to fail. Warning klaxons blare, red lights flashing in the gloom, and the tech priests rush forward, their mechadendrites working frantically to stabilize the systems, but they cannot. The Necrons have already begun the process of disconnecting the throne from its power supply, rerouting the flow of energy away from the Emperor and toward their own devices. The Emperor stirs. For the first time in 10,000 years, he moves. It is not a grand gesture, not a rising from the throne to smite his enemies. It is a small thing, a twitch of a skeletal hand, a flutter of eyelids over eyes that have not fully closed in millennia. But it is enough. The psychic pressure in the chamber increases, becoming almost unbearable. The tech priests collapse, blood streaming from their noses and ears. The Necrons, immune to psychic phenomena, continue their work, but even they sense the change. The being on the throne is waking, and what happens next is beyond even their ability to predict. Some among the Necron forces begin to question whether this was wise. The overlords do not. They have come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now. The throne will be theirs, and with it, control of the Webway portal. And if the Emperor dies in the process, so be it. He is merely another obstacle to be overcome. The disconnection is complete. The tubes and cables that have fed the Emperor for 10,000 years are severed, their contents spilling onto the floor in a pool of nutrient fluid and sacred oils. The Golden Throne powers down, its hum fading to silence, and the chamber is plunged into darkness, save for the green glow of Necron eye sockets. The tech priests are dead, their bodies slumped over their consoles, and the Custodians are gone, their last stand having bought only minutes. The Emperor is alone on the throne, his body unsupported, his psychic might the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. And then, slowly, he begins to slip. The Astronomicon, that great psychic beacon, flickers once, twice, and goes out. Across the galaxy, navigators scream as they are plunged into darkness, their third eyes blinded by the sudden absence of the Emperor's light. Ships in the warp are lost. scattered across the Imoterium like leaves in a storm, their crews doomed to wander forever or be devoured by daemons. The Imperium, already strained to the breaking point, begins to fracture. Worlds lose contact with Terra. Segmentum commanders declare themselves independent, and in the darkness, chaos laughs. The Necrons, however, are not idle. They have not come to destroy the Emperor, but to claim the throne and the secrets it holds. Cryptechs begin the process of adapting the throne's technology to Necron systems, interfacing their alien machinery with human design in ways that should not be possible. They are not interested in the psychic components, for psychers are anathema to the Necrons, but the Webway portal is another matter. The portal, still sealed by the Emperor's will, represents a gateway into the Webway, that ancient network of tunnels through the Imoterium. The Eldar built the Webway, but its foundations are far older, dating back to the Old Ones. The Necrons remember the Old Ones. They remember the war, the betrayals, the final desperate gambit that saw the Khatan shattered, and the Necrons victorious but hollow. The Webway was supposed to be destroyed in that war. Its tunnels collapsed, and its secrets lost forever. But it endures, and now the Necrons have found a way in. The portal activates, not fully, not as the Emperor intended, but enough. A dolmen gate is constructed around the opening, Necron technology meshing with human design in a grotesque hybrid that pulses with green energy. The air in the chamber tastes of copper and ozone, and reality itself seems to bend around the gate as it powers up. Canoptech constructs pour through first, their spider-like forms skittering into the Webway to scout and secure the immediate tunnels. Behind them come the warriors, marching in perfect formation into passages that were never meant for them. The Webway reacts badly to the Necron presence. The tunnels were built for organic life, shaped by psychic will and maintained by the dreams of the Old Ones. The Necrons are the antithesis of this. Their mere presence causes the Webway to decay, its walls cracking and bleeding energy into the surrounding Imoterium. Daemons sense the breach and come howling toward it, drawn by the sudden weakness in the barrier between realities. But the Necrons are ready. Pylon technology, miniaturized and portable, creates null zones around their forces, pushing back the warp and stabilizing the tunnels through pure negation. The daemons crash against invisible walls and dissipate, their essence unable to maintain coherence in the face of such profound anti-psychic power. On the throne itself, the Emperor's body begins to fail. Without the constant infusion of psychic energy from the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers, his form cannot sustain itself. Flesh that has been preserved for 10 millennia by sheer willpower and technology starts to crumble. His fingers turn to dust, then his hands, the disintegration spreading up his arms like some terrible disease. The golden armor fused to his body cracks and falls away in pieces, clattering to the floor of the throne chamber. His face, once radiant enough to inspire billions, collapses inward, the skin flaking away to reveal the skull beneath. And still, somehow, he holds on. His psychic presence does not diminish. If anything, it grows stronger, more concentrated, as if the destruction of his physical form is allowing something greater to emerge. The Necron overlords observe this with what might be curiosity in a species capable of such emotion. They have witnessed the death of stars and the collapse of galaxies, but they have never seen anything quite like this. A being of pure will, refusing to die even as its body betrays it. The Emperor's consciousness expands. No longer anchored to flesh, his mind reaches out across the galaxy with a clarity he has not known since the days of the Great Crusade. He sees his Imperium, fractured and bleeding, a million worlds crying out in the darkness as the Astronomicon fades. He sees his sons, the Primarchs both living and lost, each carrying their own burdens of failure and duty. He sees the Necrons in his throne room. Their cold metal forms a violation of everything he built. And he sees the Webway, that ancient network now crawling with machines that have no right to walk its paths. For a moment, just a moment, he considers letting go. The burden has been so heavy for so long, and the temptation to simply slip away into whatever lies beyond death is almost overwhelming. But then he remembers why he sat upon this throne in the first place. Not for glory, not for power, but because humanity needed him. That has not changed. If anything, the need has grown more desperate. The psychic backlash begins. The Emperor's death, or transformation, or whatever this metamorphosis should be called, sends shockwaves through the warp. Every psyker in the galaxy feels it, a sensation like a door slamming shut in the depths of their mind. Some go mad on the spot, their minds unable to process the sudden absence of the Astronomican's guiding light. Others simply collapse, their connection to the warp severed as cleanly as a cut nerve. On Terra itself, the reaction is catastrophic. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the organization responsible for training and sanctioning psykers, finds itself dealing with thousands of sudden casualties. Astropaths scream and claw at their eyes, trying to gouge out the third eye that has become a source of agony rather than insight. The sanctioned psykers attached to guard regiments across the planet begin to hemorrhage from every orifice, their bodies unable to contain the psychic pressure that has nowhere to go. And in the underhive, unsanctioned psykers, those who have hidden their abilities from the black ships, burst into flames as their uncontrolled power consumes them from within. But the Emperor is not gone. Not entirely. His consciousness, now unbound from flesh, begins to seep into the warp itself. Some among the ecclesiarchy will later claim this as proof of his ascension to true godhood, the moment when the God Emperor became more than metaphor. Others, more pragmatic or more heretical depending on perspective, will argue that what emerged was something else entirely, a gestalt entity formed from 10,000 years of worship and sacrifice, wearing the Emperor's memories like a mask. The truth is unknowable, lost in the maelstrom of psychic energy that erupts from the Sanctum Imperialis. What is certain is that a new presence manifests in the Imperium, vast and terrible, and it is very, very angry. The demons feel it first. They are the closest to the source, having pressed against the Emperor's psychic barriers for millennia. Now those barriers are gone, but instead of a feast, they find themselves facing something that burns them simply by existing. Lesser daemons are annihilated instantly, their essence scattered to the warp winds. Greater daemons, beings of immense power who have terrorized reality since the birth of their dark gods, flee in terror. The Necrons in the Sanctum feel it too, though they cannot understand it. Their sensors register massive energy spikes, readings that should not be possible within normal space-time. The overlords order a withdrawal, recognizing that they have achieved their primary objective, and that remaining risks forces they cannot afford to lose. The Dolmen Gate has been established, the Webway is accessible, and the Emperor's physical form is destroyed. That is enough. The Necron legions begin to phase out, teleporting back to their tomb ships in orbit. They leave behind only a garrison force, Necron warriors and immortals tasked with holding the Sanctum until more permanent defenses can be established. These warriors do not question their orders. They simply take up positions around the ruined Golden Throne, their Gauss flares ready to disintegrate anything that approaches. The throne itself is a wreck now, its mechanisms shattered and its systems offline. Without the Emperor to maintain them, the ancient devices have simply ceased to function, their purpose rendered obsolete by his absence. Outside the palace, the battle continues. The Imperial defenders, unaware of what has transpired in the Sanctum, fight on with desperate fury. Space Marines from a dozen chapters hurl themselves at the Necron lines, their bolters roaring and their chainswords screaming. The Imperial fists, true to their heritage, refuse to give ground, fighting from behind improvised barricades made from the wreckage of their own vehicles. The Grey Knights, sensing the psychic upheaval, know that something terrible has happened, but they have no time to investigate. Necron forces still press forward, and the daemons that had been gathering at the edges of the battle, drawn by the promise of bloodshed, suddenly surge forward in a tidal wave of madness. The three-way battle that erupts is beyond comprehension. Humanity fights the Necrons while the Necrons fight the daemons while the daemons attack anything that moves. The streets of Terra run with blood and oil, and the sky is lit by the glow of burning hab blocks and exploding ammunition stores. And then, impossibly, the daemons begin to die. Not driven back, not banished, but truly destroyed, their essence ripped apart by something that burns with golden fire. The Space Marines see it first, shapes moving through the warp-tainted air, forms that glow with an inner light so bright it hurts to look at them directly. Some claim they are angels, the Emperor's own divine warriors come to save his children in their darkest hour. Others insist they are hallucinations, psychic projections born from the trauma of the Emperor's death. A few, those with the clarity to see past hope and desperation, recognize them for what they truly are. Fragments, pieces of the Emperor's consciousness, given form by the belief of trillions and empowered by the sudden release of all the psychic energy that had been bound within the Golden Throne. They are not entirely real, but they are real enough to kill. The daemon hordes melt before them like snow in sunlight, and the golden figures turn their attention to the Necrons. The machines, unable to be affected by psychic power, find themselves facing something that transcends such limitations. The Emperor's wrath, distilled and given purpose, can harm even that which has no soul. The Necron garrison in the sanctum is annihilated. The golden figures pour through the corridors like a flood of light, and where they touch, living metal corrodes and resurrection protocols fail. The Necron warriors do not flee. They cannot. Fear is beyond them, and their programming demands they hold this position at all costs. They fire their Gauss flares until the barrels melt, cutting down the approaching figures by the dozen. But for every one that falls, 2 more appear. The battle is silent, save for the hum of Necron weapons and the crackling of golden energy. There are no war cries, no screams of pain, just the methodical destruction of one force by another. When it is over, nothing remains of the Necron garrison but corroded metal fragments scattered across the floor. The golden figures do not linger. They dissipate as quickly as they appeared, fading back into the Imperium like dreams at dawn. The surviving defenders reach the sanctum and find it empty. The Golden Throne is shattered, its wreckage still smoldering from the energy that coursed through it during the Emperor's transformation. The Emperor himself is gone, his body reduced to ash that has already been scattered by the recycled air of the palace. The tech priests who enter the chamber fall to their knees, their mechadendrites hanging limp, unable to process what they are seeing. The Custodians, those few who survived the defense of the Eternity Gate, stand in silence, their golden armor scorched and dented. They have failed. The one duty entrusted to them, the protection of the Master of Mankind, has ended in catastrophe. The Captain General, still alive through some miracle of skill and fortune, removes his helmet and stares at the empty throne. His face is expressionless, but there are tears running down his cheeks. He does not wipe them away. There is no point. The Emperor is dead, and with him, the dream of a united humanity. But the Imperium does not collapse, not immediately. The Administratum, that vast bureaucratic machine that governs 1,000,000 worlds, continues to function because that is what it was designed to do. Orders are issued, resources are allocated, tithes are collected, all without any real understanding of what has occurred on Terra. On distant worlds, far from the light of the Astronomicon, planetary governors continue their rule, their populations unaware that the god they pray to no longer sits upon his throne. The Space Marine chapters, each a sovereign entity unto itself, make their own decisions about how to respond. Some declare crusades against the Necrons, vowing to retake Terra or die in the attempt. Others turn their attention inward, protecting their own recruiting worlds and the populations under their care. A few, perhaps the wisest or the most cynical, recognize that the Imperium as it was is finished, and they begin to prepare for what comes next. The Necrons consolidate their hold on Terra. With the immediate threat neutralized, more forces phase in from the tomb ships, securing the planet section by section. The population is not exterminated. The Necrons have no interest in genocide for its own sake. They simply ignore the humans, treating them as irrelevant unless they interfere with Necron objectives. In some ways, this is worse than outright slaughter. To be killed is to be acknowledged as a threat. To be ignored is to be deemed unworthy of consideration. The people of Terra, those who survive the invasion, find themselves living in the shadow of metal gods who care nothing for their existence. They continue to work in the manufactorums, to pray in the cathedrals, to live their lives as best they can, but the weight of hopelessness is crushing. Terra was the heart of the Imperium, the sacred soil where the Emperor himself walked. Now it is just another world under Necron occupation, and the prayers of its inhabitants go unanswered. The Webway becomes a Necron highway. With a dolmen gate established beneath the palace, Necron forces can now deploy anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Tomb worlds that were isolated by their location suddenly find themselves connected to the greater Necron network. Dynasties that had been at odds with one another for millions of years are forced into an uneasy cooperation as they exploit this new strategic asset. The Elder, when they discover what has happened, are horrified beyond measure. The Webway was the last gift of the Old Ones, a refuge from the horrors of the Fall, and a means of travel that did not require exposure to she who thirsts. Now it is compromised, its tunnels crawling with the very machines that helped destroy the Old Ones in the first place. Craftworld seers attempt to seal off sections of the Webway, collapsing tunnels and erecting psychic barriers, but the Necrons adapt. They bring their pylons, those reality anchors that suppress the warp, and use them to stabilize the collapsing sections. The Webway, ancient and resilient, begins to change under Necron influence, its organic curves replaced by angular Necron architecture, its psychic resonance dampened to near silence. Humanity fractures. Without the Astronomicon, interstellar travel becomes almost impossible. The warp is too dangerous, too unpredictable, for all but the most desperate or most skilled navigators. Systems that were once connected by regular trade routes become isolated, their populations forced to rely on local resources. Some worlds adapt, their populations banding together to face the challenges of isolation. Others descend into civil war, different factions fighting over control of dwindling supplies, and on some worlds, the worst happens. Chaos, ever opportunistic, seizes the moment. Cults that had been suppressed for generations rise up, their members empowered by the sudden influx of warp energy that floods through the cracks in reality now that the Emperor's presence no longer holds it back. Daemon incursions multiply, and worlds that might have been saved by the arrival of Space Marine reinforcements are instead left to burn because no help can reach them in time. The Space Marine chapters become kingdoms unto themselves. Cut off from Terra and from each other, they are forced to operate independently, each chapter master making decisions that would once have required approval from the High Lords. Some chapters embrace this new autonomy, seeing it as a return to the Great Crusade era when the legions carved out their own domains. Others mourn the loss of unity, recognizing that a divided Imperium is a weak Imperium. The Ultramarines, ever pragmatic, begin to organize the worlds of Ultramar into a more formal empire, a bastion of order in the chaos that has engulfed the galaxy. The Blood Angels struggle with the loss of the Emperor's psychic presence, their connection to the Astronomicon having provided some measure of relief from the Red Thirst and the Black Rage. Now, with that connection severed, the madness spreads through their chapter like a plague, and desperate measures are taken to keep it contained. The Space Wolves, never ones to bow to authority they did not respect, continue as they always have, defending their corner of the galaxy with fang and claw and a fierce refusal to surrender. The Adeptus Mechanicus faces an internal crisis. The fall of Mars to the Necrons and the subsequent activation of the scrap code has crippled the Forge world, and with it, the Mechanicus' ability to supply the Imperium's military. Forge worlds across the galaxy find themselves cut off from Mars, forced to rely on their own knowledge and resources. Some succeed, their tech priests proving capable of maintaining production without the guidance of the Fabricator General. Others fail spectacularly, their lack of understanding leading to catastrophic breakdowns and industrial accidents. And a few, a very few, begin to question the foundational beliefs of the Mechanicus. If the Omnissiah was the Emperor, and the Emperor is gone, then what are they worshipping? Some turn to the Void Dragon, the Khaitan shard imprisoned beneath Mars, seeing in it a more tangible god of the machine. Others reject the idea of gods altogether, embracing a philosophy of pure logic and reason. The schism that results threatens to tear the Mechanicus apart, and civil war breaks out on several Forge worlds as different factions vie for control. The Inquisition, or what remains of it, struggles to adapt. The Emperor's Tarot, that psychic divination tool used by Inquisitors to guide their actions, has gone dark. The cards no longer speak, their connection to the Emperor severed along with everything else. Inquisitors find themselves operating blind, forced to rely on conventional intelligence gathering and their own judgment. Some rise to the challenge, proving that their faith was never dependent on the Emperor's active presence. Others falter, their certainty shaken by the realization that they were not as close to him as they believed. And a few, driven mad by the sudden absence of the guiding light they had relied upon, turn to darker powers for answers. The radical factions of the Inquisition grow in influence, their willingness to use chaos against itself no longer seen as heretical but as pragmatic. The Puritan factions resist, but they are weakening, their numbers dwindling as more and more Inquisitors embrace methods that would once have earned them an exterminatus order. On Terra, the Necrons complete their transformation of the Sanctum Imperialis. The Golden Throne is dismantled entirely, its components catalogued and stored for later study. In its place, they construct a control nexus, a hybrid system that combines Necron technology with what little they can salvage from the human machinery. The Webway portal is now fully integrated into the Necron network, a permanent gateway that pulses with green energy instead of the golden light it once held. Cryptechs work tirelessly to expand the gateway, widening it to allow larger constructs to pass through. The first monolith to phase through is greeted with what might be satisfaction by the overlords present. Though their metal faces show no emotion, more will follow. The plan is to turn Terra itself into a tomb world, a forward operating base from which the Necrons can launch expeditions across the galaxy. The human population will be allowed to remain, for now, their labor useful in maintaining systems that the Necrons do not wish to waste resources automating. It is a grim existence, but it is existence, and for many, that is enough. The ecclesiarchy faces a crisis of faith. The news from Terra, when it finally reaches the various cardinal worlds, is met with disbelief and horror. The God Emperor, who had sat upon the Golden Throne for 10,000 years, is gone. Some preachers declare that he has ascended to true divinity, that his physical death was necessary for his spiritual apotheosis. They point to the golden figures that appeared during the battle as proof, claiming them as angels sent by the now divine Emperor to protect his children. Others reject this interpretation, insisting that the Emperor was never a god and that his death is simply death, a tragedy to be mourned but not an occasion for celebration. The schism runs deep, and it is not resolved peacefully. Cathedral worlds become battlegrounds as different factions within the ecclesiarchy fight for control of the narrative. Sisters of Battle find themselves torn between conflicting orders, some being commanded to purge the heretics who deny the Emperor's divinity, while others are told to destroy the blasphemers who claim he was divine. The bloodshed is immense, and it weakens the ecclesiarchy at a time when unity is most needed. Yet even in darkness, there are sparks of defiance. The Imperial Fists, their fortress monastery aboard the Phalanx, still intact, launch a counterattack against the Necron forces occupying Terra. It is a suicide mission, and every space marine involved knows it, but they go anyway because that is what they were created to do. They drop from low orbit in Thunderhawks, their bolters firing even before they touch down, and they carve a path through the Necron warriors with brutal efficiency. They fight their way to the ruins of the Golden Throne, hoping to find something, anything, that can be salvaged or that might give them hope. What they find instead is the control nexus, and they realize with horror that the Necrons have not just occupied Terra but have begun to transform it. The decision is made quickly. If they cannot reclaim the throne, they will destroy it. Melter charges are placed around the nexus, enough explosives to reduce the entire chamber to molten slag. But before they can be detonated, the Necron response arrives. Lichguard teleport in, their dispersion shields deflecting bolter fire as they close the distance. The Space Marines fight to the last, but they are outnumbered and outmatched. The melter charges are disabled, the Space Marines are killed, and the control nexus remains intact. It is a small victory for the Necrons, but victories accumulate, and each one brings them closer to their ultimate goal. That goal remains unclear even to those who study the Necrons most closely. Some among the Imperium scholars, those who survive in isolated libraries and archives, believe the Necrons seek nothing less than the complete reclamation of the galaxy, a return to the status quo that existed before the war in heaven. Others argue that the Necrons have more specific objectives, that certain dynasties are pursuing their own agendas independent of any unified Necron strategy. Imotekh the Stormlord, for instance, is known to be empire-building, conquering worlds not for resources but for the prestige of ruling over them. Other overlords seek biotransference reversal, the process that would restore them to flesh and blood, an obsession that drives them to raid genetic laboratories and xenobiology research stations across the galaxy. And then there are the Silent King's adherents, those Necrons loyal to Sarek who believe that the Necrons must unite against the Tyranids, seeing in the Hive fleets an existential threat that dwarfs even the ambitions of individual dynasties. The lack of unity among the Necrons is perhaps humanity's only advantage, but it is a thin one. The appearance of the golden figures becomes more frequent in the years following Terra's fall. They manifest in places of great suffering, battlefields where the Imperium's forces are on the verge of annihilation. Sometimes they turn the tide, their presence driving back the enemies of mankind and giving the defenders a chance to regroup. Other times, they arrive too late, and all they can do is bear witness to the slaughter. The ecclesiarchy seizes upon these appearances as proof of the emperor's divinity and ongoing protection. Shrines are erected at sites where the figures have been seen, and pilgrims flock to them in numbers that strain local resources. The figures themselves do not communicate. They do not speak or respond to questions. They simply appear, act, and disappear, leaving behind only the memories of those who saw them and a faint scent of ozone that lingers in the air. Some tech priests attempt to capture one for study, deploying containment fields and null zone generators, but the attempts fail. The figures cannot be contained because they are not entirely real. They exist in the overlap between the material universe and the warp, and any attempt to bind them causes them to dissipate like fog in sunlight. The galaxy settles into a new equilibrium, one that is darker and more fragmented than the age that preceded it. The Imperium endures, but it is an Imperium in name only. There is no central authority, no Terra to provide guidance and coordination. The High Lords who evacuated the throne world before it fell have set up a government in exile on distant worlds, but their writ does not extend beyond the systems they can personally reach. Sector governors rule as kings, and chapter masters become warlords, each carving out their own domain and defending it as best they can. Trade collapses, and with it, the shared culture that once bound humanity together. Within a few generations, worlds that were once united under the imperial creed begin to develop their own customs, their own interpretations of the faith, their own ways of life that would be unrecognizable to their ancestors. Humanity, always on the brink of dissolution, begins the slow slide into fragmentation that characterized Old Night, and there is no emperor to unite them this time. The Necrons, meanwhile, continue their slow awakening. More tomb worlds activate, their systems repaired by Canoptech constructs that have labored in darkness for millions of years. The control of Terra and the Webway gives the Necrons a strategic advantage that they exploit ruthlessly, launching raids deep into territories that were previously secure. The Tau, the youngest of the galaxy's major powers, find themselves facing Necron incursions in the Damocles Gulf, their Firecast warriors learning that their railguns and pulse weapons are barely effective against living metal. The Orcs, always eager for a good fight, hurl themselves at Necron lines with gleeful abandon, and some war bosses become obsessed with defeating the shiny gits who refuse to die properly. The Tyranids, arriving from beyond the galactic rim, encounter Necron tomb worlds and find them indigestible. There is no biomass to consume, no genetic material to absorb, and the hive mind recoils from the sheer wrongness of the Necrons, rerouting hive fleets away from heavily Necron-occupied regions. Even the Great Devourer has limits, and the Necrons represent something so antithetical to life that even the Tyranids avoid them when possible. And in the warp, the presence that was once the Emperor continues to grow, fueled by the belief of trillions, shaped by 10,000 years of worship. It becomes something vast and incomprehensible. The Chaos Gods, for the first time since their ascension, feel something like concern. This new entity is not one of them, does not feed on the same emotions, does not play by the same rules. It exists in opposition to them, a force of order in a realm defined by chaos. And it is getting stronger. Nurgle, ever curious, sends plagues to test this new god, diseases that warp reality and corrupt everything they touch. They are met with golden fire and burned away before they can take hold. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, spins, plots and schemes, attempting to manipulate the entity into serving his purposes. The schemes unravel, their complexity turned against them, as if the entity can see every possible future and choose the one that thwarts Tzeentch at every turn. Khorne sends his bloodthirsters, greater daemons of immense power, to do battle with this interloper. They are cast down, their forms shattered, and their essence scattered. Only Slaanesh, the youngest and perhaps the most patient of the four, holds back, watching and waiting to see what this new player in the great game will become. The entity does not speak. It does not demand worship or issue commandments. It simply exists, a presence in the warp that shines like a beacon even as the Astronomicon remains dark. Psykers who survive the initial shock of the Emperor's transformation learn to draw upon this presence, finding strength and clarity in its light. It is not the same as the connection they once had to the Emperor. That was a lifeline, a guiding hand that could be felt even in the darkest moments. This is different. This is distant, impersonal, a sun that gives warmth but does not notice the individual caught in its rays. Some Psykers mourn the loss of that personal connection. Others embrace the change, seeing in it an opportunity to forge their own path without the overbearing presence of the Emperor dictating their every action. The debate rages in what few sanctuaries the Adeptus Astra Telepathica still maintains, and there are no easy answers. On Terra, the human population begins to adapt. The Necrons are not kind masters, but they are predictable. They do not demand tithes of food or manpower beyond what is necessary to maintain basic infrastructure. They do not care about imperial creed or the worship of the Emperor, and as long as the humans do not interfere with Necron operations, they are left alone. It is a strange kind of freedom, one born from indifference rather than benevolence. Generations pass, and the memory of what Terra once was begins to fade. Children grow up never having seen the Astronomicon's light, never having felt the presence of the Emperor in their daily prayers. They know the stories, passed down by parents and grandparents, but stories are abstract things, easily dismissed or reinterpreted. To them, the Necrons are simply part of the landscape, metal giants that occasionally stride through the streets on unknowable errands. Life goes on, diminished but not extinguished, and humanity proves once again its remarkable capacity for survival in even the most hostile environments. The question that haunts what remains of the Imperium's leadership is simple and terrible. Can Terra be reclaimed? Militarily, the answer is almost certainly no. The Necrons have fortified the planet beyond anything the Imperium could hope to overcome. The Webway portal gives them instant reinforcements, and their technology is so far beyond Imperial capabilities that even a successful landing would quickly turn into a massacre. But symbolically, Terra is everything. It is the cradle of humanity, the site of the Emperor's palace, the holiest world in the Imperium. To abandon it is to admit defeat, to acknowledge that the dream of a united humanity is dead. Some argue for exactly that, for turning attention to the worlds that can still be saved and building something new from the ashes of the old Imperium. Others refuse to accept such defeatism, insisting that as long as one human draws breath, the fight for Terra must continue. The debate is bitter and unresolved, dividing the scattered remnants of Imperial leadership into factions that grow more hostile to each other with each passing year. In the end, the fall of the Golden Throne and the Necron conquest of Terra mark not an ending but a transformation. The Imperium of Man, that vast sprawling empire that once spanned 1,000,000 worlds, is gone, but humanity itself endures. On isolated worlds, populations band together to face the horrors of the galaxy without the protection they once took for granted. On Forge worlds, tech priests labor to rediscover lost knowledge and build new weapons to fight the enemies that press in from all sides. In the depths of space, Space Marine chapters hunt Xenos and heretics with the same zeal they always have, their purpose unchanged even if the structure that once supported them has collapsed. And in the warp, the presence that was once the Emperor watches, its attention scattered across 1,000,000 points of light, each one a human soul struggling to survive in a galaxy that wants them dead. The Necrons, having achieved their immediate objectives, turn their attention to other matters. The Webway is theirs, a prize beyond measure, but it is also a liability. The tunnels are decaying, their structure unable to support the Necron presence without constant maintenance. Cryptechs work to stabilize them, but progress is slow, and there are entire sections that have collapsed entirely, their locations lost and their contents trapped forever. The Silent King, Sarek, when he finally learns of what Imotekh has accomplished, is both impressed and concerned. The conquest of Terra is a significant achievement, but it has drawn attention to the Necrons at a time when unity among the dynasties is fragile. The Tyranids are coming, their hive fleets moving ever closer to the galactic core, and Sarek knows that the Necrons will need all their strength to survive what is coming. Internal conflicts, ambitious overlords seeking glory. These are distractions that the Necrons cannot afford. He begins to exert his influence, calling for a gathering of the dynasties, a council that has not been convened since before the Great Sleep. The response is mixed. Some Pharaons heed the call, recognizing the wisdom in unity. Others ignore it, too consumed with their own projects to care about the greater threat. The Necrons, for all their technological superiority, are as fractious as any other species, and that may be the weakness that ultimately dooms them. The story of the Golden Throne's fall is not one of heroes and villains, not really. It is a story of inevitability, of a system that was never sustainable finally breaking under the weight of its own contradictions. The Emperor was dying long before the Necrons arrived. The Imperium was fracturing long before Terra fell. All the Necrons did was accelerate a process that was already underway, pushing humanity over a cliff it was already teetering on. Whether this is a tragedy or an opportunity depends on perspective. For those who lived through it, who watched the Astronomicon flicker and die, who felt the Emperor's presence fade from their minds, it is the end of everything. For those who come after, who are born into a galaxy without the Imperium's oppressive certainty, it might be a chance to build something different, something better, or at least something more honest about what humanity is and what it can achieve. The golden figures continue to appear, scattered across the galaxy like stars in the void. They do not lead, they do not command. They simply exist, a reminder that something of the Emperor endures, even if it is not the man who sat upon the throne. Whether that is enough to save humanity, whether belief and willpower can overcome the material advantages of enemies like the Necrons, remains an open question. The galaxy is vast, uncaring, and filled with horrors beyond imagining. Humanity has survived this long through stubbornness, faith, and a refusal to accept the inevitable. Perhaps that will be enough. Perhaps it will not. But the story is not over. It never is. As long as one human remains, as long as one voice still cries out in defiance of the darkness, the story continues. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, that might be the only hope humanity has left.